you so much. Hey everybody, how y'all doing? Yeah, so my name is Zandashe Brown. I'm a programmer with the New Orleans Film Festival. And I'm so excited that you all are here for this case study on the inspection. We have director Elegance Bratton and producer Effie Brown joining us. So please give it a hand. So, as we tend to do around here, this will be a really kind of casual, open conversation. I think I'll maybe kick off a few questions just to get things started and talk about, you know, the process of the journey of making this film. But I really do want some audience participation here. So be thinking of questions that you'd like to ask the filmmakers, and I'll save the majority of the time for all of us to be in a discussion and to just see where, you know, just see where we go. It's all about the journey. So, for starters, Elegance, can you talk about just the what were the initial seeds of this project, and when you knew that you wanted to start writing it? Like, what sort of gave you permission to make this first film? Because I find that's something a lot of filmmakers need.
Sure.
Or this feature.
Sure. This film, well, first of all, it comes out of my life. You know, spent some time, 10 years homeless, and, you know, went through a lot of self-doubt. I can't stress enough how difficult it is to start one's adult life when the very kind of basis of one's identity causes such a horrific series of events to happen in your life. And, you know, it's a long story, but essentially, you know, I got to go to Columbia University after I joined the Marine Corps. And when I got to Columbia, it was really intense for me because I was like, okay, well, all these people have privilege, all these people have legacy. I grew up needing money. I grew up, you know, working class parent, paid every 2 weeks. Top of the 2 weeks, you have money. End of the 2 weeks, you don't have anything. So when I got to Columbia, I was like, okay, what is the thing that will allow me to be in this space? And I realized that my legacy was the journey that I had been on from Columbia, or from homelessness through the Marine Corps to end up at Columbia. And that's when I started making Peer Kids, right? So Peer Kids is about, you know, homeless queer and trans youth on Christopher Street Pier, the same place I went to when I was first kicked out of my house. And so when you say, like, what gave me permission, Peer Kids is the first kind of instance of me being like, okay, let me explore maybe not literally my life, but the physical location that housed me when I was homeless, and I found community in. And then once I got to Tisch School of the Arts, you know, it was really difficult because this type of stuff that I was making, you know, it was Walk For Me, my first short, played here as well. 99% black trans women in the movie, and my professors and a lot of my classmates were skeptical of that interest. They're like, you'll never play Sundance with that movie. I didn't. But, you're right. Not that. But,
just about that.
Yeah. But I did play a lot of other festivals. I played, you know, almost 250 festivals, something like that, with that film. And that movie led to me selling my first TV series, My House, on Viceland. And once I sold that show, I was finally in a place where I actually had a little bit of money. Like, I did not have to think about it too much. And I was like, okay, I will never be this stable in my life again. It's time to write a feature. So I wrote 3 features. I wrote Jazz Hands, which is essentially New Jack City meets Pretty Woman, but instead of crack cocaine, it's this kid's dick that he realizes will make him, take him out of the ghetto. And then the feature-length version of Walk For Me, and this film. And all of this is happening on our shitty couch in our shitty apartment in Harlem. And I was talking to my husband, Chester, and I was like, Chester, which one of these should I go for? Because it's going to be, you know, I'm a fairly well-researched person, and I'm aware of a lot of filmmakers, you know, journeys to their first features, and I understood that it was going to be a Herculean task to get those pages onto screen. And Chester was like, you need to tell a story that only you can tell. You need to take the audience to a place that only you can take them to. And when Chester, so to say I gave myself permission may be the wrong thing. It might be like I got ordered by my producer to write this film and to see this film through. So I guess all that to say, I think the thing to do is to be aware of one's experience, yes, but also to be aware of where one's experience is overlapping with a human experience, right? And that's what this film really is. It's me. It's not a process of recollection. This is not about like, on September 15th, this happened at boot camp. Here's the scene that proves it. It's more so about capturing the essence of emotional truth. And to me, emotional truth comes down to meaning, and it comes down to what's learned. And if I learn something from it as a human being, it's highly likely that other human beings will as well.
It's beautiful. Thank you. And so it's really interesting what you said about Peer Kids sort of being the first exploration of this time in your life. And a lot of filmmakers, their first features tend to be their most personal works. Did you think that this was, like, did you have the inspection in your head sort of in the long run, or? Well,
the funny thing is, I initially thought I was going to write, I'm still going to write an autobiography at some point, but I thought this was going to be a book first.
Okay.
And then a lot of my friends sold books, and they were broke as hell after selling books. And I was like, well, I don't want to be broke. So I'll make a movie. And I'm still broke. So.
I mean, no regrets.
None. Period.
So, Effie, I would love to hear.
I'm sip on this good coffee. Okay. I was like, say what now?
Take your time. I'm gonna ask my question real slow.
Okay.
Yes. So I would love to hear about how you got introduced to the project, and then maybe hear you both speak about just who the first sort of attachments were to it to kind of give it some speed.
Sure. So what I love. Here's the real skinny. I've been reminded of what really happened.
Forever.
We actually met 2018, and I was at a function. I was receiving an award I was a part of Project Involved for Film Independent, winning whatever, and I met you and Chester at this part. I don't remember Elegance at all. That is the God's honest truth. But I remember his lovely husband, who is like fabulous, Chester. Like everyone, we're really missing a piece of ourselves on this thing because he's so fabulous. But Chester was like, hey, Effie, and I was like, okay, you know what I mean? He's lovely. And he was like, we're like, no, girl, you're gonna make our movie. And I was like, okay, great. You know what I mean? Like you do that shine on, like just like, okay, sure. And literally, in 2020, I took over a company called Game Changer Films, which develops, finances, and produces films for women, people of color, LGBTQ+, and people with disability. So, and we did a film called Passing, we put money into, and and then there was another film, but we didn't take a big bet yet. Do you know what I mean? It was like little bits here, and what were we going to sort of plant our flag on? And I have to say, it was a beautiful storm because some folks were participant called, some folks from an agency called, some folks were like, yo, you got to meet these guys. And I was like, who? And okay, no, I'm just kidding.
I know
you're useless. I'm the worst. But anyway, it's real. But I will always be real. Like it's a true or false. And so they came into my office, and I think I read the script before. No, I read it after. No, before.
Well, I sent it to you in 2018. I don't know if you read it because you never responded to me.
You know what? And that is part of the course. I am not someone who's like, don't send me something. And scene. No, but when you guys came into the office, I feel like I want to. The truth is, and I don't know if I read the script beforehand. I had to have because I'm an Army brat, and I remember. I feel like I read it because I was like, "This is my movie." Do you know what I mean? Like I was literally at that when someone comes into me and you're like, and you're trying to play a little hard to get, which I'm not good at anyway. But it's not my forte.
Like 10 minutes, you're
I was like, this is mine. You're not leaving. You're my movie. This is gonna be it. And they were like, and because they were still dating. This is a long-winded story. They were still. You were talking to Macro. Yes. You were talking to everybody else, and I was. Don't want to say the last stop, but
no, well, you were actually the first stop in 2018.
Okay, right. I just opened myself up to that. Did you see that? Just open. I gotta have my more coffee. Anyway, so that was it. So like you were first. You were just late. But anyway, but like that's how that sort of came together. You guys came into the office, and it was that movie where, and I've done like. like Real Women Have Curves. I've done Dear White People. Like I've done movies before that have sort of hit a bit of a zeitgeist, you know. And I have to say, when I read this, you have this moment where you're like, ooh, you get really excited because you're like, this is it. This is the one. This is like this. No, it's not being. I mean, I'm just doing business. But like, it's like a business sense. You're just like, oh shit, I got something here, and how do I let them walk away with me as a producer, right? You know what I mean? So that's how we sort of got together. And then I'm gonna pass this off to you because I can go on and on. But like, but you also, there's a thing that we don't talk about that you guys should probably talk about is the A24 of it all.
Yeah.
Because we co-financed the film. We put in half the money at the beginning. It grew a little bit more. Thank you, A24. But you had A24 in your back pocket beforehand, and you were searching
for a producer. So like basically, I wrote the first draft of this in 2017. Like pretty much right after I played Walk For Me at this festival, like within maybe 4 months, I had the first draft of the script. I went to undergrad with an executive at A24, and like they weren't an executive. But by the time I started grad school, they were on their executive track. Now they've graduated to like, I think they're vice president of development or production, something like that at A24. But at the time, they were somebody's intern when I was starting film school. Zach Vargas. He doesn't really. I'm just gonna say. He doesn't love it because every time I say his name at a thing, he gets like 50 emails from black filmmakers. So
Zach Vargas.
I'm
like, as a producer to the executive, I'm like, I'll say
know that man. Don't know that man.
So like,
I'm all Z.
literally, every festival there's like 50 more people. He's like, dude, what did you tell them? Like, I'm the Harriet Tubman of film.
And I don't answer emails, but he will.
But no, so like, Zach, as I was making my first films, he was rising as an executive. So he had just gotten into A24 in an official, I don't know what his title was, but he was in development side. And I brought the script to him and I'm like, dude, I really think this is an A24 film. And he read the script and he's like, not yet. And, I guess if there's anything I can say, like, we had a notes process going on for almost 3 years prior to the script being approved. Because at A24, everybody has to say yes. The executives at Creative have to say yes. The marketing people have to say yes. Sometimes even the interns have to say yes. The whole company has to be behind it. So you're really, it's like garnering a vote in a way, right? You're campaigning the film to try to get more and more allies within the company on the side of the film. While that was going on for those 5 years, I'm making short films. I had a TV show. I started producing work for other filmmakers, right? And eventually did have some movies at Sundance. Got Buck into Sundance, which was my, Sundance debut. Thank you so much. Debut as a director. And, it's funny because I think we were on our way to being greenlit by A24 anyway, but Sundance just kind of kicked it just a little bit extra, And then, so when we got greenlit, we met with, Noah Sacco, Zach, and, a couple of the top people at A24, pitching the movie again. It was kind of similar to that situation with you, where I think they were going to say yes before I said anything, but, you've still got to, I feel like anytime you're in a room pitching your movie, it should feel like you've had an emotional experience. A person you're talking to should have an emotional experience.
That's good.
And a lot of times, like we were just talking about a mutual friend of ours, who I think is a brilliant artist, but they're at a point still where they're like very caught up in the whole like representation of it all and like the theory behind representation. And to me, it's kind of like anybody with a decent amount of education and exposure should know by now what the value of having different people on screen is. The question is, what's the story you're telling? And is it compelling or not? And sure, there's a lot of socially, politically compelling reasons to tell different stories, but at the end of the day, if the person sitting across from you is like looking at their phone, losing interest, then they're going to assume that once this movie plays somewhere, people are going to be taking out their phones and losing interest. So, so I pitched the movie again, had the emotional experience with them. It was great, gave them faith, and then they're like, well, you and Chester are brilliant. We love you. We want to work with you for years, but you need an experienced producer. right? You need somebody who's on the ground. And like, granted, we'd met a lot of people up to that point, but you were still at the top of my list and Chester's list. So that's when we came back to you. And but it just so happened, and what I'm not saying is we did the Film Independent lab. Chester did the producing lab. I had given up on every lab by that point. I applied to Sundance a bunch. They said no every time. I applied, everywhere that I can, everywhere I could apply. Everybody said no. And at a certain point, after going to Sundance and Cannes and going to these places, I realized most of these movies playing the festival, even by first timers, are not coming from labs. And quite honestly, the people making the best money are also not coming from labs. At least right away. Obviously Ryan Coogler's had an amazing, wealth building experience being a filmmaker. But so I was like, fuck it. I don't need a lab. I can just go to every company myself. And then Chester got producing lab at Film Independent. That opened the door for us to get fast track at Film Independent. We also got Tribeca All Access, which is no longer around. And between Tribeca All Access and Film Independent, we took about 140 meetings with all of the relevant companies that do films like this. And suffice it to say, those meetings did two things. It got the script around Hollywood, and there's just a dearth of opportunities for Black queer actors, Latin actors. You know what I'm saying? So that created a ton of excitement, and then it also put the pressure on A24 to actually get behind it. And I called up my contact and I sent him a text. I was like, listen, I sent him the picture of Harry Potter on the train to his school, and I'm like, this train is leaving the station, boo. You know what I mean? You can jump on and ride with me or not. You're gonna feel stupid in 3 years if you miss this opportunity. And they were like, you're right, and they jumped on. But when you say like what made it fire, there were like a couple of things. The first thing is the script. It has to be on the page. If it's not on the page, if you have to explain it on the page, it's not on the page, right? It has to just. I had to get the script to a place where I could just send it, and people could read it, and they would be excited. They didn't need me to be sitting across from them to explain to them why they should be excited. And then the second thing that happened, I think Effie was a key part of that, right? Having an experienced producer with a legacy made A24 more comfortable, right?
Yeah, I mean, and just to sort of high five this a little bit too, because like, and I think it's really interesting to talk like you're doing now to do the deeper dive of how this green light happened, because it was literally two moving trains. Because it took them a minute, even after I was on, to be like, this is the green light. Now you have the green light, and as a producer. Like, you know what I mean? There's conversations that, like, you would have driven you nuts to be a part of, but to be like, okay, how are we doing this? And we came in for, like, half the money coming in, and at first that was good for them, and then it became problematic a little bit for them. We're dealing with, like, ownership and, like, who's doing what, and part of that being, part of the whole green lighting process as well. But you're right. I mean, I just think it's important, because sometimes I think people think that like, oh, they're green lit and now you go. No. And it's like green light really means like you have 6 more months. Right? You know what I mean? Right. Before it's really official. And there's really money in the bank.
Because there's like the money side of it, but all of that is contingent on cast to a certain extent. And it's like
Gabrielle Union.
It's like two trains at once, because it's like Jeremy is somebody that I knew had to be in this film. Right it had to be an out Black queer actor. There's just everybody has had a chance to play gay now. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, right, except for a gay actor. So when you put it like that, there's only a handful of people that it could be, right? If you're gonna go with a name, right? And Jeremy is just a phenomenal generational talent. It oozes off of him. But that being said, at that time, Jeremy was not yet a movie star, right? And A24 being theatrically oriented means you have to get someone in the movie that has some sort of track record of, putting ass in seats. Speaking of asses in seats. Get your ass in your seats. I'm sorry. But, so Gabrielle Union, like, to Effie's point of, like, kind of, like, the staggered nature of the green light.
Yeah.
We were greenlit, provisionally greenlit when we brought Effie on. We were provisionally greenlit when we were casting, we were zeroing in on our lead actor. We were greenlit when Gabrielle Union got on. And the funny thing is, Kim Coleman is our casting director. I don't want to not acknowledge Kim Coleman. She's a legend in her own right on the governor's, what is it called? Panel? What is it called? the Governors?
I don't know, but she's great.
She's at the Academy.
She's a
amazing.
big deal.
She's a big deal. And incidentally, I met Kim Coleman for the first time doing production assistant work on her daughter's thesis short for Tish. And that was 4 years before she ended up casting this movie. So you know what I'm saying? Like, the resourcefulness, you know, if you're trying to be a writer-director and you really, like, you are the ignition, right? Whatever, you are the head of the beast. However you move around your film, it's not everyone else around you is going to move about your film. So, you know, mind you, I had, Chester was on that film as a costume designer, and I said, babe, let me come out there with you, I'll work for free. Because I knew that if I spent time with Kim and I were going to form a relationship because me and her daughter were so close, you know? And it's not to say that I was forming that relationship just to get this outcome, but it is to say having that relationship helped me get this outcome.
And I just want to say, I want to just high five you. It's called the hustle. Do you know, not like hustle like transactional, but literally of showing the ambition that you had and what you said, like, I'll work for free. I'll come and work. You know what I mean? On something like that means a lot because you were able to get those relationships. And that's what it's really, I mean, just say that's what it's really all about. Because if someone's like, oh yeah, I know you from so-and-so. Oh yeah, and after seeing someone like 3 times, it's like, oh, you're not scary. I should probably like know your name and know a little bit about you. Yeah.
So like once Gabby got involved, we were, there was a big debate about who was going to be the lead. And there were several, I'm not going to say their names, but there were several very prominent actors who were up for it. I knew I wanted Jeremy. So when Gabby asked me, who do you want to be in it? And I said, Jeremy, she's an executive producer on the project. She's also the green lighting force. She got behind Jeremy too. And Effie was behind Jeremy.
Yeah, exactly.
And Chester was behind Jeremy. So now I had, from the production side of the film, a nice front, right? You're gonna have to say no to all these people. And luckily, they said yes.
And it was great to watch her in that role too. It's so different than what I've seen her in before. And I'm curious too, like, what were those conversations like? And then I promise I'm coming to y'all because we're getting warmed up now. What were those conversations like when you approached cast?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'll start. So with the troupe, they don't really get enough attention. The supporting actors within the recruits, right? Iman Esfandi. Iman came to us through the kind of traditional audition process. In this room, he was not, unfortunately, my first choice. I made a mistake. And gratefully, the actor that I thought was the right guy refused to cut his hair. And I was like, okay,
Right?
you can stay there. You don't have to come here. And I'm grateful that happened because Iman, I think, is I mean, there's several discoveries in this movie. I think Iman is another generational talent in terms of his acting. But Aaron Dominguez, who plays Castro, he hit me up on Instagram after we announced in the trades that the movie was going forward and that Gabby and Bokeem and everybody was in it. He hit me up on Instagram and was like, I need to play it. He initially wanted to play Rosales, but I felt he was a little too young for Rosales. So we ended up playing Castro. And I guess another kind of side note on the casting is that I was trying to mirror people in the casting so that Raul and Aaron kind of sort of resemble each other. You know, McCall and Brooks kind of sort of resemble each other. And then French and Laws, you know, the father-son kind of dynamic of it. So that whole idea of like the generational pull of toxic masculinity and the whole culture becoming a man was important to kind of, I just wanted the essence of that. So by casting in this way, that made it possible. But yeah, you know, so yeah, that's how Aaron got the part. He hit me up, and mind you, a lot of people hit me up in the DMs, and they did not get the part, but he got his part that way. And then in terms of Raul, I was Tribeca did their first queer whatever it was. I don't remember what it's called, but I was not invited to the party.
You remember
at all.
That he remembers.
And I heard that Raul was going to be at this party. You know, again, the hustle element. I know people. So I got the guest list, and I saw his name on the guest list, and I'm like, okay, I got to get into this party. So I showed up to the venue, figured out my way in. I was talking to Larry Kramer, who does, you know, God rest his soul, icon of queer rights and what have you. And Larry and I was having a real spiritual moment with Larry, because personality-wise, I'm very much aligned with Larry Kramer. And then Raul walks in, and I literally jumped over this man's wheelchair to get to Raul. and I bum rushed Raul. I was like, Raul, listen, bro, I got this script I'm writing, and this is in 2018. I got the script I'm writing, bro. You gotta be in it. You're gonna love it. It's literally gonna change your life. It's a great part. And he's like, great, thanks. And he gave me his info, and I texted him the script. Fast forward 2 years, he never texted me back. Fast forward 2 years, we're casting, and he sends in a tape. And of course, he's the only person I wanted to play the part, and I felt really validated by his performance on the audition. So, you know, we had our little Zoom, and he was like, where do I know you from? And then I texted him again, and he's like, oh, man. That's how Raul talks. But, and then for Bokeem, interestingly enough, I thought initially I wrote Laws to be a white guy, you know, and then kind of encountered the reality of, you know, kind of post-George Floyd Hollywood, where a lot of white men were just reticent to take on this role opposite a black lead. They didn't want their careers to be kind of couched in that way. And I was pulling what's left of my hair out over it, and then I got word through my agency that Bokeem read the script and wanted to play Laws, and I literally was like, fuck it, Bokeem. And, you know, Officer and a Gentleman is such a huge influence on this movie. So Lou Gossett Jr. in that film is just so very memorable against Richard Gere. So Bokeem to me had that kind of gravitas. And, you know, and I'm also a Bokeem stan. I mean, I think anybody who loves acting in the last, like, 30 years of American film, you can't deny that Bokeem Woodbine is a capital A actor. So once I found out it was him, then those conversations that you and Chester had, I was like, okay, this is actually, now I have someone in my head that I can see doing it. And then the last of it, you know, Brooks came in the normal way. Nicholas Logan came in the normal way. But, you know, Nicholas, for Brooks, to me, Brooks is probably my favorite of the three drill instructors because he's based off of someone that I served with in boot camp. So, you know, I needed someone who had a strong improvisational ability, who could, like, you know, and the thing about it is, I guess another thing about directing actors that I like to do is, and especially in a movie like this where it's so ensemble driven, having a wild card like Nicholas involved makes everybody step their game up. Because if you don't watch out, he'll take your scene. And I'm the type of person where if it's good, I'm going in that direction. And whatever we wrote, we're gonna just rewrite right now. And they learned that about me on set really fast. So I think Nicholas's abilities to just kind of like, at times, you should see like stuff that didn't make it in the movie. You know, he really could just take over this frame. And I think that kind of, between Jeremy's level, Brooks's level, Raul's, they were all pushing each other to be better and better and better. So yeah, that's how the casting came together.
Thank you. Y'all ready?
Oh, and I begged and cried for Gabrielle to be in the movie.
Literally?
Literally. Tears.
So I want to open it up to the audience. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand. Okay, and I'll have you just state your question, but in general, if y'all aren't loud enough, I'm just going to repeat it into the mic for you. Okay. Yes.
So though the characters throughout, they seem like they have, you know, a strong, clear arc. When you're at boot camp, like those kind of, it feels like it has an almost episodic feel, like these individual, you know, like sequences. So what I'm curious about for both of you guys is, was the sequencing, like the order you put those events, was it kind of intuitive, and was there much shuffling around and like rearranging those puzzle pieces?
Yes.
I love you. It's like, fine, but don't say too much. Okay. No, what's so I will say that in the script form, one of the things that we had the most conversation about is the timeline and the length of time, right? Because it's sometimes it's like, oh, this happened over several days. That's the same day, Effie. And I was like, oh shit, okay. So like that was really one of the things to really work on, is to get that sort of sequence and to get how tired they were and all of that. But I will say, there's that old film school adage, you have the film that you write, the film that you shoot, and then the real film is made in the film that like you cut, right? Because there are definite scenes in there, like the actual inspection at the end where we placed it for graduation was actually one of the first scenes that were supposed to come up, right? So that was one of the things where you have to, and I always give you love for this because I work with a lot of first-time narrative directors, because you've done feature directing already of docs, where they get so intractable, like, this is the way that it has to be, this is my real life, this is how it, like, and what was so great is that you were like, all right, you were able to look at something, and if something didn't serve the whole narrative, you were able to put things and resituate things and do it as a puzzle, which I think really benefited this movie. Because it could have been a whole other way where you would be like, oh, for fuck's sake, how much more time do we have till we get to this?
Right.
And hopefully that didn't feel that way, because we were able to sort of weave in.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Effie. In that, you know, I think the best thing I can say in terms just the question behind the question. Think very consciously about your collaborators. I really don't want anybody in the room whose ideas I'm not excited by, just in general, not even as it relates to my script, right? So there was so much conversation that happened between us before we ever got on set, and we would just talk about just random shit, you know. And in that.
Gabri's, sorry, yeah,
No,
but that was part of it. Like, one of the things we're talking about, like, I didn't, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a minute, like, your relationship with your mother and how
Yes.
that was reflected
Yes.
between French
Yes.
and, you know,
Yes.
and, you know, and I was like, ooh, and then talking about unconditional love, because, like, for me, of just being like, I couldn't understand how you came at that with such unconditional love and forgiveness, because I was like, retribution, fuck that, let it happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you're like, Effie. Like, I'm like, oh, should I be taking this to my own therapist? But you know what I mean? But that's
Right.
part of those were the conversations I was a little nervous to have, because it was, but you again were like, let's talk about it. You were able to listen, and then actually able to, like, get us all in line. Do you know
Well-
what I mean with your vision?
Well, the other thing is too is that my personal philosophy around production is that, you know, every department head is the director of their particular thing. So looking at it that way means I'm not going to hire someone to be in charge of something that I don't trust to direct their thing. You're not just a costume designer getting clothes for me. You have to be as much of a creative force in your lane as I am, right? And then at the end of the day, because as the director of the film, if the movie sucks, it's all your fault. No one's gonna be like, oh, poor COVID, poor heat, the actor didn't feel like doing it. No one's gonna say anything like, this guy sucks, he's horrible, you know? And this guy, right here. And, you know, and conversely, when there's a great idea that you take, by the time you get to this stage, everybody's giving me credit. You know what I'm saying? So, no shade. I mean, I'm just keeping it real, you know? So it's like, you have to make space for that. In terms of, like, the actual flow of the story and timeline, you know, the thing about it is that being in boot camp, you forget you're only there for like 90 days. It starts to feel like forever, because it's the same outfits, the same haircut, the same buildings, the same knowledge, the same exercises, you know, the same people over and over and over again. So at a certain point, I started to look at this script from a more poetic kind of nature, and I started to lean into the thematic structure, what was going on, and try to use that structure as a way to push character development, rather than being so consumed by a plot, which ultimately, to a meaningful extent, not totally, but a meaningful extent, is writing itself. You know, if you stick around for boot camp, you're gonna graduate, right? The question is then, so it's not about graduation, right? It's really about acceptance. It's really about camaraderie and friendship and the human connection, and that's, plot-wise, that's what, you know, we're tracking more so, and the idea of graduating boot camp is a foregone conclusion for those who are sticking around. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't know. Thought somebody had earlier.
Well, that's very fair. Yes, somebody over here had a question?
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have a question.
Yes.
What was your best pitch to a producer or a financier? When you walked out, you said that was my best pitch, and that worked.
Really quick for the folks in the back, I'm going to repeat. The question was, what was the best pitch that worked for you for producers and financiers?
I mean, it's weird. I guess I can say this, like, it's tough. I don't want to come off arrogant in any way, but I know I'm a good storyteller. I think every pitch I did was good. The question is, you know, when is somebody going to take that risk? And I guess what I can say is that, first of all, you know, it has to be, I said this before, it has to be an emotional experience when you pitch your movie. And it has to be tight. You got maybe 10 minutes to get the whole movie across and to make someone feel like they have to watch it, you know? So that particular goal took me a while to get to. It's just a matter, you write a draft and then you write a log line for that draft, and then you're like, wait, this log line doesn't really do anything. I say it in front of people and it's like crickets, right? And then you get notes on your draft and you're like, okay, let me change this thing, and that changes the log line. And then, you know, at a certain point, so I found the log line that worked. And then I found the kind of through line on French, right? And then really for me, what was kind of the pivotal thing was figuring out how to balance my own personal, and mind you, a lot of the best pitch you guys heard last night, right? This pitch hasn't gone anywhere. I'm still going back to that pitch when I show this movie around the country and the world, you know, because whether I'm talking to a journalist who has 5 minutes, 15 minutes to write something that would hopefully entice someone to buy a ticket, or I'm talking to an audience and I have a 15-minute Q&A and I need people to walk out of that theater passionate about the movie, that initial 10-minute pitch I'm still returning back to because it works, right? It worked enough to get us here, and now the thing that's shot is reflective of the script that was written, so why would I change it? You know what I mean? So in that regard, what I can say is, like, you know, you have to know, you know when you're telling a good story. You know when it's connecting. You might need your movie to be made right now, but it's not gonna be made until you're able to tell that story in that 10 minutes. And lastly, sometimes it's not all about getting a yes. Like, I pitched you. You didn't even remember. And then
I love you. No, but I mean, like, but just like you came into the office,
Yes.
and I think it's interesting. You think like that, like you're a brilliant storyteller, and you know how to talk.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, like, to come up off the money that we came up off of, and to be like, fine, we're gonna plant Game Changers flag on this. It was really your confidence. It was real. I mean, for me to be, and also the script was good, no matter what. Because there's people who can fucking talk a really good game, but if they have a shitty script, I'm not making your movie. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, and if you had vice versa, and sometimes like you have a really great script, and the director's like, oh, they're not a talker, but you know what I mean? It's a problem. You were both, but you had confidence, and you knew your what and your why, and that is actually when people are when they're pitching to be like, what are you doing? And why are you the one to do it? That was really the most, for me, I was like, okay, this cat, like, we can plant the flag. Because if this failed, it would have, my company would be fucked.
Oh my God.
No, I mean this in a real way. I mean, like, but like, it would have been like, but it did it! Woo! We won! Yeah.
But, you know, at the end of the day, though, it's not necessarily about getting a yes for your movie sometimes, right? Because one thing I was very aware of with my first feature is a lot of my favorite first feature directors didn't make anything else for like 3 to 5 years. And that's because I think they got too caught up in the outcome of that first feature. I've gotten so many jobs in this industry from people who said no to my feature, but were seduced by my pitch.
Yeah.
You know, and it's.
I think seduced by you. I think, you're giving
Right.
your pitch a little too much credit. I mean, like, you are an artist. No, I mean, like, I'm not. Like, you're an artist. You're smart. Like, you know your what and your why, and not just in this movie. I think in your career and what you want to do. And if there's anything like that, should be a big takeaway for people who are trying to be on the come up.
Yes.
Of being. That's what I mean. That sense of security, confidence. It matter where you came from because you know where you're going,
Right.
and you were very clear of like who. I don't let anybody surround me that I'm not excited by their ideas.
Yes.
And that is really, people feel that of like, well, it must be good if he's cool and I'm with him. Hey, you know what I mean? It is sort of so. Anyway, but I just want to.
But the point is, I don't want to. Again, I don't want to talk about myself too much. But like at the end of the day,
yes, you do.
No, I don't. Not on this. Not on camera. In private, with a drink, I'll talk about myself all night. But like, but yeah, you know, it's not as much as you might need that first feature to get greenlit. You might need this opportunity to happen right now. In reality, it takes the time it takes to have the script ready. It takes the time it takes to have the relationships ready.
Yeah.
And it's not just about your first feature, because you can make a great first feature, but if you don't have a next step, and a next step means you have to have a community of collaborators within the industry to help you make that next step still, right? So if you're just so tuned in on like whether or not this person says yes or no to me, if they say no, fuck them, I'm gonna delete them off of my Instagram and move on. Wrong. You might eventually find someone who's seduced by your your little movie, I'm breaking up with my girlfriend, we're in an apartment type, you know what I'm saying? A lot of you know what I'm saying? There's a type of movie that first time filmmakers very often are making, right? And unfortunately, for the most part, that movie is very hard to turn around into a career in a business where the margin of investment is so high, and the like where I'm at now, I wish I had 5 years to write another script. I have stories that I'm like writing that are 5-year scripts because now I'm in a place where like, oh, you can write a script, go. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, so you want to really think about how am I using this interaction. Sure, the priority is that feature that you're trying to get made, but it's really those relationships that you're trying to build. That's the real priority, right? So that when you go to all these festivals around the country, you walk into a room and that person knows you, and this person knows you, and that person knows you. And then all of a sudden, it starts to feel like something is happening to people watching you. And you'd be surprised what type of opportunities you can shake out of that momentum beyond the thing that you want to make.
So I'm gonna come back to the middle, and then I saw a hand in the back as well. Yes.
Hey, love the movie, by the way. Really good. Had a good time. Very curious. I know it's a question about like photographing the film and how you guys went about doing it, because I know Lachlan did Minari,
Yes.
and I recognize the daylight stuff, gorgeous work, exteriors. But I was really curious about how you guys chose a lot of your interior lighting choices. I know, like especially for the inspection scene, very beautiful, clean, but then you got into a lot more color in terms of like the purple in the shower, and I noticed on the ending shot with Gabrielle and your main actor, I'm so sorry I forget his name.
Jeremy.
I'll be looking out for him. But I noticed there was a little hints of like blue and red in there, so it was like a good contrast, cool, warm, and I was just kind of curious how you guys, from like pre-pro through shooting, decided on some of those choices, and what like your thoughts on all of that were.
Sure. I mean, first of all, Lachlan Milne is a creative genius in his own right. And I'm a photographer first. My first thing I ever did was a photo book called Bound by Night about the ballroom scene in New York. And I came to the film with a ton of visual references. Like, first, the whole idea of this movie is important to me because we really haven't made enough content around the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era, which maybe got its name in the 90s, but in actuality, queer service members were forced to serve in silence for almost 80 years, right, before the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So right away, it was important for us to establish a visual language specific to this moment of the film coming to life. So when you're in French's point of view, I think the movie is very much like a European high art cinema type of film, like a Claire Denis film, or like, maybe even, well, Claire Denis is probably the best, Beauchevalier is probably the best comparison, but when we watch French in the world, it's much more, and it's handheld in French's point of view, but when we see him in the world, the camera is on sticks, right? The camera is stabilized, more like a Full Metal Jacket. And the idea is to suggest through a visual language that can kind of assert the shaky ground that queer people have stood on for those 80 years of serving in silence, right? So that the film itself is imbued with this essence of that tension and anxiety around being this type of person in this type of institution, right? And then once we get into like the color choices, people like William Eggleston were huge influences. Sally Mann, the great Southern photographer, another one big influence on this, and particularly using the landscape, to Effie's earlier point about the passage of time, using the landscape to suggest the passage of time, whether that be looking at the clouds like Eggleston has done in his career, or looking at a mound of ants populating a hill at midday, right? Things like that. And then finally, from the color choices, the color palette of the movie is very much inspired by the Marine Corps. It's, the red, gold, and green that Marines wear. And it's also red, white, and blue, right? And being kind of conscious, because, Inez's color palette, Gabby's character color palette, it's blues and grays. And red, right? She has a red bag, red lips, red jewelry, that kind of thing. So, when you're talking about the hallway scene, this is a subtle way to kind of bring that red and blue in, and the kind of coolness and the warmth of that, of the juxtaposition of the coolness and the warmth of those colors really is the juxtaposition of the relationship that French has with his mother. And we're trying to use the light to kind of, extend the internal emotional life of these characters. Use the frame. And I'm a big mise-en-scène person. I don't really like to do a lot of backstory. I feel burdened sometimes writing stuff about black folks, queer folks, where there's just a lot of explanation. Like you watch a ballroom movie, like this is a gay father, or this is a gay mom, and they're queer, and they can Vogue, and it's all definition oriented, and it starts to kind of feel like the whole idea of humanizing humans in film irritates me. I hate when people say that. I fucking hate it. Because they're already human. And even if you don't understand them, it doesn't make them any less human.
Oh, that's...
So, you know what I mean?
Sorry, that was out loud voice.
Yeah.
I was like, that is great. I never, yeah.
It drives me crazy.
That's, yeah.
Especially coming from like a film school like Tisch, where everybody's, at least when I was there, most of everybody was white and rich. Mm-hmm. And they could like literally go on the Swiss Alps in a country chalet and just go. And everybody's like, gets it. But I go to a black trans ball, and everybody's like, wait, humanize them, please, make them human beings. So in that regard, it's like the mise-en-scène for me, like when you're in Inez's home for the first time, I grew up, my mother was a hoarder, so navigating her home itself was an experience of physical abuse. Before she ever did anything to me, walking from the couch to the TV, I didn't fit. There was no room for me here. Do you know what I'm saying? So trying to use the frame to tell the story is very much from my history as a photographer, right? You only have one picture. I had this teacher, I'll wrap on this, I had this teacher, Tom Roma, who's, to me, one of the greatest living American photographers, a mentor of mine. And he said in my first class with him, he was like, listen, because we went to Columbia, so it's a heavy research writing school, and he's like, listen, every photograph should be a 1,000-word essay. I should be able to look at that photograph and look at what's in it and write a story from what's in that photograph. And you should always reveal something about yourself that you wish you could take back. Because that's the thing that's going to make somebody in a gallery stop. That's the thing that's going to make someone say, this photo goes in the National Library of Congress. Those other photos, you could leave them on Instagram. You know what I mean? So in that regard, we're trying to use the light in a way that is evocative of what I've been through. And to Effie's earlier point, once we got into those conversations, that script started to get more and more pared down, because now I'm seeing it on screen. I don't have to say it anymore. Even from Jeremy's performance, we initially wrote all these ballroom flashbacks, and then once I saw Jeremy perform, literally the first day, I was like, okay, we can cut them. And you were like, don't cut them. And I'm like,
that's very true. I didn't want to cut others. That's very true.
But once I started to see them in the frame doing it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to trust the audience. I'm not going to try to... Jeremy would tell me on set all the time, like, dude, this scene, you have gilded the lily. You have written it well 3 or 4 times within the scene. And a lot of our work together was about, hearing where he resonated with a particular moment as an artist, and then returning back to the page and being like, okay, where is that essence in what I've written? And then cutting everything else.
Yes, in the back.
Hey, so you spoke at length, both of you, about authentic authorship and creating emotionally elevating work, especially with Game Changer's mission. So I've got like a 2-part question. How do you navigate human-centered scripts with like the business of film? And also, do you both have anything in the works that you're really excited about that you want to share today?
I could be working, so I'll learn.
2-part question. How to navigate human-centered film, human-centered stories in the business of films, and do you have things in the works that you're excited about?
I actually think that, thank you so much for that question. I don't think it's for me, I've always been Black, I've always been a woman, and those are the people that gave me a shot early in my career, from But I'm a Cheerleader to like Cheryl Dunier's Stranger Inside. And what's interesting, when you say human-centered, that's what we are that for my some but the what I'm into, like that's what we are. And I'm sorry, I'm still tripping out about like the humanizing, because just give me just a quick beat, because I actually, that's a weird sense of bias, because I say that like humanize it. I say that.
It's just me.
No. Actually, like you blew my mind a little bit, and that's my takeaway from this, because it's going to actually affecting the question that I'm trying to answer now, where it's like, well, if we're all human, I'm just trying to tell stories that looks like this room, right? And then knowing the business side of it is that like, inclusive films, it's not a charity, it's not philanthropy, it's good business, period.
Yeah.
We show up. We're the majority. Like, I don't care what anyone says. Women are 51%. You know what I mean? Like, we're the majority. All of us together. That's all it. That's why, originally Game Changer was only a film fund for women. And when I took it over, I was like, why are you segregating us? I go, all of us, if we all came together, we're fucking undeniable, right? And that's where I'm coming from. And so far from, like, Real Women Have Curves, from, like, all the movies that I've done, it's hit. Do you know what I'm saying? It hasn't hit my pocketbook. This one is, though. We gonna make this work. Please go tell people to see this movie. You know what I mean? But that's the business of it. Like where art and commerce can come together when it's inclusive, and that's what I believe, and that's what has been showing up thus far.
That's a great answer. For me, first of all, this is show business, and very often in Hollywood, the assumption is whoever the movie is about is the limitation of its audience. So we're in a moment where like the Chinese marketplace is, very much impacting what's being made in America, because at the end of the day, there's over 1 billion consumers over there who also need entertainment. So it kind of lends itself to a world where, if white men have been ruling everything and everyone's used to seeing white men as heroes, then the audience for a film that centers a white straight movie star is going to be massive in comparison to the audience of a film that centers a black gay actor. And I think it's a historical question as well, right? Because the art form itself is 120 years old, and it started by, in Europe, by Eurocentric white supremacist people, right? And even the first movies that we see, The Nook of the North, or the Molière brothers, there's a certain kind of, it's taking a picture. It's not giving a picture. You know what I'm saying? There's a certain kind of level of voyeurism and exploitation implicit in the art form, regardless of who you're making it about or who's making it, because the mechanics of it are what they are. So when it comes down to it, audiences have had 120 years of practice centering movies about white folks. And I think to some degree, when I think about this question, I'm thinking about the audience. I'm thinking about, when do we show up to watch our movies about ourselves? Because it's show business. It's incredible that Game Changer and A24 have made an opportunity like this happen for a person like myself and my husband Chester. But at the end of the day, it's a theatrical release movie. If the people who are in this room, right, the people who are the diversity in the world, don't show up and make our movies hits, now that idea of like who the movie is about is an expression of its audience starts to be proven true, right? It's a precedent-driven business. Tom Cruise gets $20 million a picture because he's made $5 billion in the box office. So if you want Jeremy Pope to get $20 million a picture, we have to figure out how to take these movies into the country and make them hits. And eventually, how do we take them overseas and make them hits? And that's an ongoing, and mind you, this whole question, since Oscars so white, I mean, it's a very new conversation. So, we're still learning, but to Effie's point, I don't see it as I think every good movie is about human beings. And I've been trying to and actively making relationships with people like Effie, people like A24 and others who are, focused on that with me. So I'm not walking into a studio bombarded by the assumption that it's automatically less than. And so I've got a lot of projects I'm excited about. I can't talk about them on the mic, but we've got a lot of things going on.
great question and answer. A show of hands, just want to get a sense of how many more questions we have. Okay, yes.
Oh, I had a similar question about the cinematography in the film. When I was watching, I noticed how everything felt very natural and like really real. Like it almost had like a documentary style of filmmaking. And I guess my question would be, was for you and your DP, was it something you discussed a lot about, like practical lighting and using a lot of practical lights, specifically for the interiors? Did you use a lot of practical lights, or was it did you guys use like lighting kits to light everything, or was it did you guys heavily depend on practical lighting for everything?
I come from a documentary background, and the way that my favorite filmmakers are, I always say I have a cinematic dyslexia. I don't see a difference between documentary and fiction filmmaking. I think there are two paths to ultimately the same goal, which is a movie that's cut together from footage that was shot, you know? So to me, it was important, like, you know, to some degree, like I've read some criticism of the film where they're like, oh, it's just a gay guy at boot camp. So what? It's the same old movie with a gay guy. And I'm like, when have you ever seen a black gay man centered in a movie in boot camp 1? And I wanted to live in that novelty, right? So that the camera becomes an expression of French's point of view all the time. What is it like to just sit with a black gay man? To watch them breathe, to watch them exist within a room. And I think the documentary, sure, I could have, you know, done a lot of bells and whistles and tricks to maybe try to outsmart the audience from that. But I feel like if this is the first time we're seeing anything like this, then we owe it to this moment. And mind you, when you have an actor like a Jeremy Pope and the actors that are in this movie, I don't want to get too cute. I want to create space for their performances to really, really shine. So, you know, all of our decisions were about, you know, adjusting to what was in front of us rather than forcing what was in front of us to adjust to like the mechanical process of making a movie. I'm always trying to adapt that process around my performers, and that's how I work with participants in a documentary, actors in a film. I'm looking for that moment of truth that I don't expect, and then I want to, let's chase that. I'd much rather chase truth than try to contrive something.
Can I ask you? Zach.
Expanding on the documentary versus narrative kind of idea, documentary spaces have very well established impact campaigning and funding, and it
Really?
seems, yeah, it seems
Where?
the Redford Center is a really good example of that. IDA is a really good example of that. IDFA is a good example of that.
Comparatively.
Yeah. Compared to narrative, which has not only pretty much no impact resourcing, but also has extraordinarily little impact campaigning separate from things like P&A, advertising, so on and so forth. I'm curious, from your perspective as someone who's made documentaries and someone who's made an extraordinary amount of really wonderful narrative films, why do you think that dichotomy exists, and should we challenge it?
I don't know that it does. I want to give Effie space on this question because Game Changer, I think you guys have this
We're
kind
trying. I know,
of
really,
wrapped up in what
that's
you do.
what we're trying to do.
You know, but I think I don't know if I don't know if I see it the way you see it. You know, Peer Kids is something I made literally in my living room, and again, you know, when I raised $50,000 on Kickstarter, I shot 400 hours of footage. I'm going to shoot a community of people who are literally a tribe of people who are being erased by gentrification. And it's spiritually connected to a movie like Paris is Burning, which has played Sundance and played all these big places. None of those places supported Peer Kids. Not one of them, right? So this huge impact thing that you're talking about, that didn't happen for me at Peer Kids. It happened when we got it to POV. But in terms of like the system I think you're alluding to, that movie exists completely outside of that system. There's no lab. You know, gratefully festivals took it on, and it played a lot of festivals, and we were able to use that. Outfest was very instrumental in helping us get it sold and helping us like meet the people we needed to meet. True False is another festival that really helped us. So, you know, I don't know that I see this elaborate system of impact support for docs that you speak of. Most of the times when I see it, to me, it's a little piecemeal. And it could learn a lesson from the actual narrative film business on how to reach audiences. Because most times I do these impact things, it's like literally the same 20 people in the room. And it's not the general public that needs to see the message, right? And then from our film side for the inspection, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure, thank you. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the question because there's impact financing. Are we ready to wrap it up? Right. Oh, no. Okay, no. There's impact financing and then there's impact, sort of P&A and getting it out into the world. And I can speak for the narrative side, like that's truly what Game Changer Films is about, right? We also have a nonprofit. We're also giving fiscal sponsorships. We're also giving stipends to people to actually to produce these films, like Each One Teach One. So, and I also want to just give a little bit of a shout out, and this is going to be a little bit of a tangent a bit, but like Participant Films does that. Yeah. There's quite a few organizations that are trying, A24, like there's quite a few organizations that are like, look, we're trying to amplify in our financing and where we put our dollars. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen of like, we have an inclusive lab, we have a black blah, 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 we're giving grants for this, yada, yada. And then you can see how Warner Brothers recently like shut it down. Like all of those programs, like I call it a blacklash. Like everybody was like, it's hip to be diverse. And then they're like, enough of that. You know what I mean? So I think that's where we are right now. So people like, I'm gonna say Game Changer, like myself, because the people who have financed originally Game Changer were high net worth individuals, right? Who are used to doing impact investing, and that was coming from the documentary world, coming into the narrative world. So I guess what the end game is, like, there is narrative that is out there for impact financing and also for P&A. And there is, in my experience, I've seen, but it's a very particular group of people who get those IDA dollars. And very rarely are they, you know what I mean? Like, just to be real, if you're not Roger Ross Williams or Lisa Cortez, do you know what I mean? Like,
a lot of times they're already successful.
Exactly, and that's
even if they're
very true.
Even if they're white, they're like
it's
the
very
top of the documentary
very
pile.
True.
So but and just to say it, A24 has been an amazing partner in terms of like mining our experiences as Black people, queer people, women, and adjusting the plan of the rollout of the film to allow us to be ourselves and reach the people we want to reach while also going for this larger audience.
Now here's something, I'm also going to do a little bit of side eye, and we'll turn off that camera in a minute. But what's so interesting is when people are using sometimes impact P&A is when they don't want to do traditional, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and that's the thing where they're like, we're going to use your social capital, you know, like, so, and that's something, it's interesting because it's a gray area where it's like, you're impact and we're going, but they're really just also, it's a more inexpensive way because you built like
And
certain
to me,
brands and
I'm not trying to read that whole side of the business, but to me, the nonprofit side of the film business, in my experience, I gave that up. I said, fuck this, because I was not going to sit around for 10 years to wait for some, white person who votes properly to decide that I mattered all of a sudden when there's a whole capitalist industry that exists outside of this. So I feel like that form of thinking, to a certain extent, is kind of outside of the circle of the business that the inspection was made in. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't know, like I don't like, and mind you, that side, that impact side, I have not had that experience of like IDA, like I thought IDA would write me. I thought these people would reach out to me, and I made peer kits. I literally,
no,
like,
I know,
you know what I mean?
It's really, and also those organizations, I'm sure we are going on about this.
Sorry.
And he's like this, I just wanted to see what you thought about it. Like, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry.
We can move on. We don't want to take it up.
And I know, and poor Zach has had his hand up this entire time.
Just real quick, from the writing perspective, and when you made the film and when you were writing, who did you think the audience was?
I thought the audience is anybody who's ever been, downtrodden, anyone who's ever been oppressed, who's been told that they're not enough. I believe that they can find inspiration in this lead character and find themselves.
Right. So my 16-year-old nephew came to see it, right?
Wonderful.
And I talked to him this morning, and he's, 16 straight. The emotion that he wanted to go join the Marines because of that. And I know we're talking about, oh, this is the
Yeah.
first gay film about a recruit going through the process of boot camp. But that's what he got out of it. And then my question to you is, and I'm listening to this, you started writing this, I don't know how long it took you to write, but initially, when you first put that pen to paper, did you know or did you have a feeling that, okay, I've got to open this up for a wider audience?
Honestly, I view myself as an entertainer as well as an
Yeah.
artist. So whenever I write something, I'm thinking about how to engage with the mass audience.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm like,
Right.
I love, my favorite artist, one of my favorite artists is Andy Warhol. And this man was not interested in just existing in the gallery spaces of, New York City. He wanted to be a global phenomenon. So, I'm very, and I grew up, and mind you, the movies that made me love film were not art house movies. It was Spielberg and Scorsese, big directors, Spike Lee. So, every project I do, even the ones that seem niche, in my head, I'm trying to reach a huge audience.
And I just have to say really quickly, like when I got the script, and one of the things that I'm making not only just a creative sort of bet, but I'm also making a financial one. This picture to me was like, oh, this is where we're going to get, the red and the blue talking. This is where I'm going to get the liberal, because our whole company, and I think we need, and you say this often, is about building the bridges. I think people in middle America are going to be able to go see this movie because it could be, I know you're pro-troop, I'm, pro-troop and military as well. You know what I mean? It's a way to get everybody under the same tent. And if they have a different experience, that's okay. But you're in the same tent and you're watching the same thing and you're able to have that conversation. And that to me was really, really on, for me, I was like, oh, this is the movie. And also, I think in every movie, or something that we've done, it's in the specificity, right? That as a universal, right? And it's like, oh, because I'm not a gay black man. I'm like this in my past life, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I don't know, but as a woman, we're not really represented in that movie except for the mother, and it might not be the best representation of a woman. Do you know what I mean? But that builds conversation, and I still felt that I was still being spoken to, not pushed out of.
Right.
And I thought you hit that beautifully in the script, all over.
Well, that's the thing too. I view, movies as kind of like cultural, religious experiences, right? The same feeling that I would get as a kid going to church. There's very similar emotions triggered when I'm in a dark theater with a bunch of strangers and we all laugh at the same thing. We all cry at the same thing. So, my religious background, growing up, church is to be inclusive. Anybody can come into the churches I went to. You all are welcome to come feel the spirituality. So never in my head am I making something. I mean, granted, I am making stuff for myself.
Right.
I'm an artist. I'm selfish. I'm narcissistic. All that. But, I'm definitely making it for me. But once I get through that first layer of it being for me, the next thing I'm thinking about is, okay, what does this mean to someone who's very different from me? How could I play this movie? I watch movies in languages I don't even speak. And I love them. I don't even understand what they're saying, and I love them. So I'm always thinking about that possibility. How do I reach someone that's not me now? But I have to satisfy me first, But then once that's done, now it's like, okay, this is a welcoming tent. It's for everybody to come in.
Well, you hit it with a 16-year-old straight gay male. So,
I appreciate it because he can be playing video games. He can be on his phone, texting somebody. So I'll take it. Thank you.
So we've got about 10 minutes left for one or two more questions. I'll start right here.
Thank you. My question is also about the writing process and specifically around writing such a personal story. It very much comes across in the film like that this is someone that you love, your relationship with your mother, but it's also an extremely painful relationship. And so I'm wondering about that particular part of the writing process for you. Did that flow for you? Or did that feel like did you ever feel like you had blocks around that because you love your mother and because you were maybe concerned about your relationship with her or her legacy or anything like that?
Well, at the end of the day, her legacy is me. So what I've been through is her legacy. So I was never conflicted about that. Now, granted, I love my mom, and there's many times where I've showed the movie. I showed it, and we had a screening in an agency in LA, and this lady walked up to me. She's like, "I hate your mom," and I was like, okay.
Don't know you.
She's horrible. You know, and that kind of stuff is painful for me because it's like, you know, as much as I don't think there's any villains in this movie necessarily, but I understand why I was as outraged by what my mother did to me as audiences are outraged by it. And as a person who's grown up with various forms of abuse in my life, it's a constant struggle to remind myself that none of that was me. That I didn't deserve that. I didn't do anything. There was nothing I could have done differently. You know, I'm not at fault. So when you talk about blocks, you know, that's the main block is like navigating this personal history that I have and understanding that the things that I've been through are not because of who I am. They're really on the other person for doing those things. But that's with this movie, you know, going to the grocery store when it crosses my mind, you know, it's an everyday struggle for me to keep sight of that. But that's why I write. You know, the whole purpose of this for me is to turn pain into medicine, you know, and I feel grateful that I've been, like, at the end of the day, I would not be here without my mother. My mother, you know, grew up in a world that is just hostile towards black women, period, let alone smart black women, let alone opinionated black women. And you can't give someone what you haven't been given. So I tried to write this in a way where it became apparent she just did not have the tools to do it. And I'm hoping that people see themselves in this character and be like, oh no, I don't want that to be me, you know, and do something different.
Yeah, it's different when you see what it looks like.
Right.
It's like, oh, is that what I'm doing? Another question in the back here.
What made you choose Animal Collective for the soundtrack?
Again, my creative partner, Chester Algernon Gordon, my beautiful, smart, talented, amazing husband. I come from my life. The thing is, like, I have way more movies to write out of my life than this movie. You know, at a certain point, when I was in the Marine Corps, I was a music critic as a side job. So I spent a lot of time with indie rock bands. I've been in punk bands when I was a teenager, traveled and toured. You know, very much in the kind of indie rock music scene of Philadelphia. Like, I know the Strokes, I know Yeah Yeah Yeahs, I know Karen. You know what I'm saying? So I've always kind of been around the indie rock thing, but I have a very diverse musical palette. You know, including a lot of black music that you would probably assume someone like me would like. So when we were making the movie, I knew right away I did not want to do the soundtrack, the score that people would have expected. The kind of like soulful, you know, hip hop oriented kind of no names because he's in a movie of mine. I can't talk about him. But I didn't want to do that. I felt like this was an opportunity to do something very different. And Chester was like, we had just moved to Baltimore. We just bought a house in Baltimore. Animal Collective is from Baltimore. And Chester was like, why don't you just write Animal Collective? You love them. And I mind you, I listened to that Merriweather Post at least once a week. I listened to it all the way through for years. It's always, you know, been one of my favorite albums. And I was like, okay, let's reach out. And they said yes. And then once we got together, you know, this is a character who's finding a new religion. You know, the religion that he was born with did not have space for him to become his best self. And the Marine Corps is his new religion. So our whole approach was to have this kind of call and response thing that is familiar to me from, you know, gospel music, but then to put that through the lens of this kind of weird indie rock thing to kind of like highlight the oddity of needing faith, you know, and not to judge the fact that one needs faith, but it's really weird to think that, you know, you can find a purpose outside of yourself. And we wanted to lean into that, so we used a lot of Bhangra, a lot of, you know, Middle Eastern Islamic prayer music, in addition to gospel music, kind of through this lens of the rock band, and this electronic rock band too that's able to, you know, there's so many guitar sounds that don't sound like guitars in this. There's so many things that sound like, oh, that's a harp, and it's not a harp. It's actually a piano. You know what I mean? And that's what I loved about them, is that they're able to kind of mix it up. And I wanted my own Danny Elfman. I hope I got them.
All right, we've got one more.
Yeah, that was kind of my question too, but playing off that,
I guess, how did that work in the editing room when you were actually laying this down and, you know, putting it against those images?
Right.
Was it making sense right away, or was that?
It took a minute.
Yeah.
It took a minute. You know, because mind you, I mean, I guess every movie to some degree is a miracle and a shit show. And this movie is no different. Because we were shut down. We were shut down during COVID. We were shut down for like 2 months. And we shot 14. The whole movie was shot in 19 days. We were promised 23. Then COVID hit. We lost, you know, I mean, it was just crazy, the rates of attrition. Because it's like, you think it's one person getting it, and that's it. But really, when it's an actor that gets it, the makeup person, the hair person, you know, so day by day, it was just like, can you shoot the movie? Dude, I don't do that. You know what I mean? So that 2 months that we were off, we began making the score before the movie was even done. Normally, it's picture locked, right? So, and then as the movie started to change through the notes, the score, you know, had to adjust. Like sometimes I would be like, I got it. And then they come back with notes and this scene and that scene. I'm like, oh, you're right. Okay. And then we'd have to kind of start over. But honestly, I have to credit to our music editor, Missy Cohen. She is a genius. I'm not going to bore you with her resume. You should just look at her IMDb. And I finally had someone to kind of interface with me in the band. And we ended up, what you heard there was made in 3 weeks.
Okay, we can maybe squeeze one more question before closing. I saw another hand up. Yeah. Who was it? Okay, yeah, you've been called out.
Yeah, I guess I think that this year, I was a jurist at the Transgender Film Festival, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that we had no submissions of feature films by transgender directors.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think I hear you that like everything is film, but I think I've been thinking a lot about what are the communities that feel like, oh, we have something to explain, we have to tell people that we're human, they should probably stop killing us, we have to explain to them why that's important, and you feel like you have to justify everything.
Like murder is bad.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I think I'm really inspired by, a lot of these like speculative, like, I don't know, Afrofuturists and speculative fiction and like, how do we imagine ourselves in the future?
Right.
But then I guess to me the rubber hits the road when I hit this like emotional wall of like, it's money.
Mm-hmm.
Like how, I guess like, cause how do we, I think the reason is like trans folks are broke, black folks are broke, right? When we come from these broke communities, I guess, how do you know that you have something that's worth investing in to them? Maybe it's like a producer question, right? But it's like, how do you know? And I think I was like, oh, I'd love to make a story that's like a T for T love story, mountaineering accident of my life. But then I'm like, oh, are they ready for that?
Yeah.
Like, how do you know that you?
Yes, they're ready for it. Yes, they're ready. And I guess there's a couple of different ways to answer that question. There are a lot of trans directors, like Silas Howard is killing it, right?
Isabel
Yeah.
Sandoval.
There's not like, we have a long way to go. We're just going to say that, but we are making strides, and that's one of the things that we're actually looking to finance. When you say for them, you know what I mean? Like, who's the them? Like, to tell our stories, like, to make this better.
White straight men.
Well, no, but because here's the thing. This is where I want to, like, it's a little matrixy and be like, that when the oracle's like, there is no spoon. Like, if we really just go, no, well, it blows my, okay, you know what? I'm old, it blew my fucking mind. And that's how I kept Game Changer going, because I was like, I've got to break out of this colonized fucking mind.
That's right.
To be like, if only the straight white people give me this money, do I have value? Is my story valid? Blah, blah, blah. And that's not true. We're playing into that. But here's the thing, who has the money? That's one thing. And that's like, there's a lot of us out here. That's why I'm saying like women, people of color, LGBTQIA, people with disability. If we can cull together, there is power in numbers. And that's literally what we've done for this movie. Do you know what I'm saying? There's also I think, and what's going to wind up happening, and you're going to see this in probably the next 2 years, there's going to be a lot of trans stories. And some of them are going to be great, some of them are not going to be great, right? That are going to be done by those filmmakers, but they're getting out there. I love how I'm calling myself everybody. I'm black and gay, I'm trans, I'm this, I'm woman, I am everything. But anyway, I'm just saying that like that's what's happened. That's my response to that. And I really would just urge to be like, stop thinking that like we got to go to these people, quote unquote, to get to our validation of
That's
our
absolutely
stories.
right. That's absolutely right. And I think that, you know, it's also about scale and scope, right? If I never got A24 and Game Changer to support this film, I was going to make this film anyway. You know, and honestly, that type of determination is magnetic, and you will attract to you what you need to get to the finish line. And mind you, you're probably already surrounded by it, because many of the collaborators on this film are people that I've had acquaintances with. The script was going through a various notes process for almost 5 years with the one executive who ended up greenlighting it. So I would say, you know, don't spite your nose to save your face. Look around you, make a great short of it. You know what I'm saying? Get the best possible people to make that short with you, and keep pushing the ball forward. And as long as you're pushing that thing forward, somebody's gonna come along and be like, you need help with that? Let me help you. And then now it's two of you pushing it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
But it's the momentum.
It's
Like
the
when you're
momentum.
it's already going. Yeah.
Folks, thank
told
you
us to wrap
so
it up.
much for your questions. Yeah, we're wrapping it up. Elegance and Effie.
And for Zandashe, holding it down.
Thank y'all, everybody. Please continue to enjoy the festival.